Today, I am joined by Dr. Lutfi Radwan and Rubi, who doesn't have a PhD, but she is accomplished in her own right. She did a degree in psychology, and Dr. Lutfi Radwan, who has a PhD from Oxford in geography. Um, I'm delighted to be joined by them both. They both own the farm Willowbrook Farm, which is quite infamous with Muslims now and growing in popularity and fame. And they've made a name for themselves with their ethical farming practices, um, ethical consumption, and sustainable lifestyles. Today we'll be talking about ethical those subjects as well: ethical farming and sustainable consumption, and a bit about their personal lives and the sacrifice it takes to actually abandon your typical careers, take risks, and create a farm without any experience. I'm very pleased to be welcoming both of you today. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for inviting us.
Okay, just to get started then, could you guys just talk a little bit about your upbringing and how, because it's not the typical move for a couple to start a farm with no experience. How did that idea come about? And what made you guys think, this is a risk worth taking?
I think it's becoming, hopefully now, something that is on the radar for the younger generation of Muslims. We hear a lot of people and we see a lot of people coming to us who are getting connected to nature and actually recognizing the importance of that within our religion, but also feel comfortable within this society to do that. But 20 years ago when we started, it was very unusual, for the Muslim community to be breaking out of the urban life, to be leaving well-paid jobs or a prestigious job at the university, to do something so totally different. But for us, it felt natural in many ways that it was part of what's the right path, as Muslims, in terms of looking at our food, our consumption, our family life. What do you say?
Well, it was very much an evolution. We both met and we were studying our degrees in London. And as you were doing geography and various things, as it took us out of the UK in different places and studying arid zones, we then met and we had experiences that were very connected to nature. We went to much more rural environments.
Yeah, we lived in Sudan, we lived in Egypt, and we started to get much more connected, as well as my work taking me theoretically more to looking at the Islamic sort of ethos of environmentalism.
So, it made us question our lifestyle and our assumptions we grow up with, and as young people and children growing up, we just accept our environment as it is. That's the way it's always been, hasn't it? So that's the way it always will be. But because we were taken out of our comfort zones, we had to question a number of things that we accepted. And as I say, that led to an evolution thought for us. And we started to think differently and realized in the end that there was only one way forward for us in particular. We were given the opportunity, by Allah, and that's when we then decided we would sell everything and start a farm. But it wasn't something we woke up with, oh, we're going to have a farm today. It evolved, it grew out of our questioning and our understanding. And that's how we got here.
Yeah.
With no experience.
Absolutely no experience, yeah. Part of it was something I think many Muslims are facing or half aware of, is the terrible state of the halal industry around us globally, but also particularly in the UK. That the halal production, it's become a big business, but it is really a factory farming business. There is so much going on that we don't want to know about, but we have an inkling that it's not right. We started to scratch the surface of that, and we were aware of the terrible abuse, the conditions that animals are kept in, the poor quality, the health issues, and then obviously the wider global impact and environmental issues. So we saw all that happening, and we were transitioning very much ourselves from consuming a lot of meat to starting to grow our own vegetables a bit in our backyard, keeping a few chickens, looking at more healthy alternatives, better ways of living.
And then it gave us insights, and it's sort of what comes first, insight or action. So as we had insight into our into the way we lived and the environment and so on, then action started to follow. And I have to say, it's still an evolution. We're still evolving. We're still, you know, our actions are still quite far behind, but our insights and ideas, you know, are way ahead. And the action is slowly catching up with what we think, you know, where we think we should be. We'll never get there, but that's not important. It's just the path.
But you know, we're looking at everything we produce, and you can see here Ruby's spinning some wool.
I've spun the wool.
We try to look at all of the resources we have around us and how we can use them. So when we're rearing our animals, we have the manures that are coming out for the veg garden. We have the byproducts such as the wool that we're spinning and producing, you know, clothing, textiles. There's so much in a traditional way of living close to the earth, where you're using all of the materials, nutrients, everything around you in a sustainable, holistic way. And contrast that with our disposable society, where everything is, you really don't want to know where it came from. You really don't want to know the implications of how it's being mined and used and created and distributed around the world. So as Ruby said, yes, as you gain more insight, you realize more what you could be doing. I've been cutting willow for the last few weeks, and we've been reweaving willow fences around the farm. And it's all of these natural, traditional techniques, ways of preserving food. It's a lifetime's experience, and it would have been a known experience, a traditional experience in traditional Muslim communities where everyone would have had that knowledge. And over the years and generations, we've lost all of those skills and traditions. And we've become a very disposable, throwaway society where we just consume and consume and consume without thinking about the implications.
Mm-hmm. And this was back in the, I think, was it the 90s you started your farm, or the early 2000s? Was that the year you...
It's 20 years. It's been 20 years.
20 years this year, so 2023. 2002. We started in 2002.
And in that time, you guys were fully aware about how the current halal industry is just factory farming and ritual slaughter, and it's a mechanized slaughter. How have things changed since then? Have they gotten much worse, or is it very much the same techniques being used at that time?
I think it's probably mostly the same, but people are changing. I remember 20 years ago, no one really talked about the word tayyib, and we were going on about, you know, it's got to be tayyib, and like we were just talking halal. And now there's so much information, you know, in the community about really getting to understand the meaning of what we're told.
Certainly has come out of the can, and in a way we can take some credit, but I think
changing.
It was something that was happening anyway. But certainly within the UK, we brought out these ideas, and it's so surprising because no one has really thought about it yet. Actually, if you look in the Quran, if you ask, and I had this group of school children today, we asked them what's halal, they'll say it doesn't have pig in it, or what's halal, oh, it's killed in a certain way. So they're the stock answers to what halal is. But look in the Quran itself. The Quran actually says, they ask you what is halal, say to them what is halal is what is tayyib. That's the self-definition in the Quran. And that's really interesting. But when we started talking about that, it seems as if people hadn't noticed it. And that's come out now into the public debate, and everyone is aware of it. There is a great danger of what we call a greenwash, that actually a lot of people are putting the stamp of halal and tayyib, even though they might be factory-bred chicken or X, Y, and Z. They're loosely using those terms. So we have to be careful about that. But there's a much greater awareness.
Yeah, the awareness is definitely there. It's really, really there, because when we were talking to people were just thinking we were idiots to even question this stuff, and weren't taking it seriously. But now so many Muslims are talking about it. They're so aware and so wanting to make a change. So in answer to your question about have things changed, I don't know that they have changed much in terms of consumption. So action, back to action, sort of insight in terms of consumption and the actual farming methods, but certainly people's insights and understandings have changed, and that's really important. So there is definitely change.
And we're always talking to younger generations coming through the farm who are interested in doing similar initiatives, and we give a lot of encouragement. And so we're quite heartened by change that we see coming through our doors on the farm. Obviously, we're preaching to the converted, that we're getting people who've heard about us and are coming to the farm because they're aware of what we're doing. But it's so nice to see the diversity in the Muslim community and the ideas coming in, and much greater awareness.
Mm.
And one thing I'm really impressed by is the willpower that in a time when it wasn't very popular, you guys have taken this plunge because this is what you believe in. Where does that strength of will come from, that you've decided X, Y, and Z is unethical and your beliefs are such and such, so you're gonna, no matter what it takes, you're gonna live by your beliefs? What is that?
Yeah, I think we did have a very strong, unshakable belief. That's true. You know, we were strongly motivated by it. But there's another element of it that we actually were just foolish enough to close our eyes and jump in. I think where most people would have sort of discussed it and over the dinner table maybe, but they would have sort of said, well, no, I'm not going to leave my job. I've got a good job, getting a good salary. I'm going to be promoted next year, or we've got the mortgage to pay. So most people, common sense would kick in. I think both of us had that insane sort of moment where neither of us said no, and we literally put the house on the market, sold it, and bought a piece of land and moved on in a caravan.
Didn't happen that quickly, though. It didn't happen in a flash, but it didn't. It was quite quick once we got going. It just took a couple of months.
So I think, alhamdulillah, it was really the fact that we didn't question it. We both sort of embraced this set of ideals that we were working towards without holding each other back, and we just went for it. And that's probably the best way.
Yeah, I think also because we sort of almost in ignorance in terms of practicalities made that jump. We sold everything, so we couldn't really go back.
Oh yeah.
So we sort of had to keep going, and it's just like Allah's mercy and creating these opportunities for us as well, that we were able to carry on. So of course things got very tough, but there was always a light. There was always a light that we were following that kept us going. So
yeah, and the intention was very pure. We had a good intention, I think, from the start.
Yeah.
And in a way, we're achieving today, as I say, we had this group of school children. It was always in our mind that this would be a place of healing, a place for people to come and see and learn. So I think, we had those good intentions, and Allah blessed us with that. And we had our own foolhardiness that let us just go for it. And as Ruby says, having sold our property, we'd burnt all our bridges, so there was no going back.
And this is such a radical change of lifestyle. It's probably very useful that both of you are on board, because marriage probably wouldn't survive if it was only one of you wanting to do it. How is this? Yeah, because my wife is really interested in this, because she finds your marriage is incredible. The fact that you've done this together and you're both on this journey together. How has your marriage evolved and become stronger, or as a result of your lifestyle and making these decisions? Because it's probably very
wow.
I think that should be a separate podcast.
Yeah.
Well, alhamdulillah, I mean, I'll make my comment. No marriage is perfect, and this brings stresses and strains, because in the early days, the first 10 years, we were working all hours of the day, late into the night, our children sleeping on a little camp bed while we were packing eggs, and doing farm work into the late night, and then doing accounts in the evening, just to sort of see if we were surviving. So incredible stresses, and I won't say that we were immune to that. It did lead to tension.
Yeah, we were tested in every single way you could imagine.
But we were working to the same goal.
But we're still here.
And we're still together, and we're seeing some of the fruits. And of course, bringing your children onto the farm. There are so many ways, you'll often hear this, that a family business where you employ children as well brings its own stresses. So there are many stresses, but that's part of the Islamic lifestyle. We don't really sort of embrace this isolated monasticism in Islam, because part of the trial of being a Muslim is embracing and being part of that social interaction. And I think that's very much part. I always stress that simple hadith, ad-din mu'amala, your religion is your social interaction. And that's important in farming, in everywhere, but in farming particularly. it's not just about producing halal tayyib food, but it's about caring for the environment, looking at the treatment of the animals, looking at the wider environment in terms of planting trees and nurturing the ecosystem, but also the social system that governs it. If you look at the social systems that govern capitalist factory farming, they're very impersonal, they're very sort of separated, isolated, individualistic, whereas the social mechanisms that govern traditional farming systems, it's all about the community involvement, interpersonal relationships, and part of that's going to be fights and struggles and arguments and whatever. That's the whole kit and caboodle. You have the whole thing together. So an Islamic holistic way of living and working on the land has to involve community. It has to involve interpersonal relationships between husbands, wives, children, employees, etc. Whereas capitalism, commoditizes, creates the terrible abuses that we're aware of in terms of exploitation of labor, etc.
Yeah, because when I was studying, one of the critiques of capitalism was that because people are so torn apart or dislocated from the means of production, we don't really care so much about how things were produced. As long as you get it cheap, it's all good. And then probably what you're doing is the incentive to take care of the environment is a lot stronger because that's where you live. Your livelihood is where you live, where you're
absolutely
where you're about. So you're not going to overindulge. You're not going to destroy the forests and so on.
And you can't separate social justice from environmental justice. The two are part and parcel. When you're environmentally destroying as a result of the production system, quite often you're also destroying communities and societies.
Because people are seen as a commodity as well.
Yeah.
The human beings are commoditized. So when you've got a family farm and you're employing people that are not family, they become family. So it's not easy to just get rid of someone who doesn't do something properly. You have to understand what the problems are. You have to work together. You have to compromise. Everyone's different. We had a volunteer here. He's quite mature. He's about our age, and he had a business in Italy, running a restaurant, and we had loads. We have quite a lot of employees and volunteers, and we always have problems, everyone just getting on. And he noticed that, and he said, in his restaurant he doesn't employ people, it's just him and his wife. They have machines to do all the jobs wherever they can. They mechanize, because he said it's just too much to have people doing stuff. So him and his wife get on. Everything else is mechanized.
But that getting on, that's the stuff of life. That's negotiating interpersonal relationships, ensuring environments are stable and supported. As I say, social and environmental justice. It's not easy. Of course, it's not easy. And then to actually go the other way, factory farming, etc., mechanization. Yeah, it's easy. It's wrong.
How has your relationship to God changed since you started farming? And you probably have a much greater connection to nature now as well.
It's it's very holistic. I think it's easy to think like you connect with Allah when you're in the mosque, because that's a religious environment, and then there's life, or just in Ramadan, to section of spirituality and connection and religion. We do that without realizing. We don't even think about it. There's work, and then there's religion or stuff like that. I think that happens automatically without us. It just happens. But here, every time we work, we have to do shukr, because like today we had this group come and it started to snow the whole day. So all the activities had to change, and there's just so much going on, and it's from Allah, and you just say, subhanallah, this is what happens. And then other days when the sun shines, you're working, you just say shukr Allah. So the ibadah takes on a different form, but it's all ibadah. And then start to really connect with the fact that every single thing ultimately cannot exist without the presence. And so it is very different. It's a different sort of experience. And I can't really describe it, actually. But I think it just needs to be experienced.
But it is also fundamental, and most people recognize it without recognizing it. We know that the Quran is full of references to the ayatullah, the signs of Allah, and those signs of Allah are always, or nearly always, references to nature, and that's where we look for Allah. We know, in terms of Islamic spirituality and philosophy, you can't approach Allah except through the ayatullah, in a way. And that's all around you in a farm environment, but we're often so separated from it in an urban environment. That's as Ruby says. You know, you have your spirituality in the mosque, but in a concrete jungle in the urban environment, you're so separated from ways of connecting to Allah. But here it's the opposite. You know, we're constantly being forced to be connected,
to become aware
through the elements, through the animals, through the environment.
And even like when you sit and you say Bismillah before you eat, it becomes automatic, which is fine. It's a good thing that you do automatically. It's a good thing if it's automatic. But the interesting is often when we're eating, sometimes when I say Bismillah, it's like really Bismillah, because half the stuff on the table we actually grew. It's like, yeah, my God, we really are being thankful because we grew this ourselves. So it takes it another dimension.
Yeah, and we live in a house that we had the opportunity to build, and this house is made of mud, clay, sand, and straw. Literally a mud house drawn from the land, mixed with our own hands, piled on top of each other, and then turned into this dwelling. Which, again, as Ruby says, we're constantly giving shukr to Allah for
the basic things that we
So,
take for granted.
I think that's the important point: is that people need to get into nature, because we are so separated, we are so clinicalized in urban environments that we can't make that connection. So just being in this environment certainly does make us more grateful. It's a strange sort of gratitude. It's the sort of gratitude that you go out and you have to split wood and fill the boiler to get heat into the house, but you still feel a gratitude, you know, when you're out there splitting that wood, putting it into the boiler, and knowing that this is wood that's harvested sustainably off the trees around the farm, and it's a frosty cold morning, and it's all part and parcel of the whole experience. You're connected at every level to your existence and to the existent.
Indeed. I wanted to ask actually, what kind of ethical considerations do you guys take into account? Because I imagine it's probably easy to cut corners and generate greater profits, but because you're doing this on principle, what kind of things are you doing to make sure that you're staying true to your values and you're not being greedy and whatnot?
Yeah, what's the quote that Khalil uses, that we're following the prophet, not the prophet?
Yeah, we still follow profit. We know that we're not pretending that we're doing all this for the goodness of people and ourselves and whatever. Absolutely, we're trying to run a business here and make a profit. In order to make that profit, we have to run a business, but that's what keeps us here. And it means that we can then use the farm for other things. So we open up the farm, we're educating people, we're trying to show people in practical terms how they can make a change, however small. We're doing what we can, everyone will do what they can. We're trying to make sure that the profit we do actually make in monetary terms is as sustainable and as halal as we possibly can. And we're always walking that road. So we haven't got there, we're going down that road. And that does mean that we may make less money, lose money, whatever along the way. But that's okay, as long as we're able to be here. And we don't need a lot of money. You know, people don't need vast amounts of money to survive. So there is a limit. We have limited what we're doing. Yeah. We could just keep expanding and having more fields and having more and more and more chickens, but then we'd just be following the profit money. You know, we'd be following profit, and we would then probably, without realizing the slippery slope, get into some principle that we don't agree with. Yeah. So we have to keep reminding ourselves while we're doing this, to keep reevaluating and checking on ourselves.
We've often had people come to the farm who advised and said, well, you could do this, you could expand, you could, and we've, as Ruby said, you know, we've taken this concept of enough, what is sustainable on the land that we have, and that's more important to us. And sometimes a lot of our expenditure is really just for educational purposes or for encouraging groups to come and work here on the farm. We have a local disability charity that come and work on the farm. And it doesn't make economic sense, but it's the right thing to do for the community development side of things. In terms of production, we've always had to look at the additional costs of doing it right as part of the plan. You know, we don't cut the corners. And we accept that enough is enough. And we're trying to hone those things now as we go. So alhamdulillah, with the support of the community that do buy from us, and it does mean they have to put their money where their mouth is. They have to pay that extra to ensure that what they're getting is quality. But with that support from them, we're able to constantly keep looking inward to improving how can we make use of natural remedies, garlic as an antibiotic, how can we improve the type of range that the chickens have, how can we look at our energy use, how can we change all of these things. A lot of production, and this is where some greenwashing goes, for example, in producing organically or producing free range, that can often be done, and you can cut so many corners. If you really look at the standards, there are so many loopholes. It's like the difference between tax evasion and tax avoidance. There's free range and there's free range, and you can bend.
It's organic, it's organic.
Yeah, you can actually get away with a lot, and that's a shame. We're not interested in that because we're not chasing the increased profit. We're interested in really trying to perfect a lifestyle that's sustainable, where we're utilizing the resources to the best advantage, and constantly looking at ways of doing more, in fact, which would be less profitable in some ways, but would enhance the whole experience.
Be a good thing, yeah.
Yeah.
We can't hear you.
We've lost your audio for some reason now.
And now? Is it okay now?
Yeah, that's good. You're back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, lost track of thought there. Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, that's actually quite impressive because the way I see it is that people who are taking care of the environment, they're not anti-profit. They're actually pro-profit in the long run, because if you cut corners and damage the earth, you're actually preventing people from profiting in the future, preventing our children from generating a profit and having a good livelihood. So in fact, being environmentalist is actually the best kind of capitalism in that sense, because it actually allows future generations to profit and live off the earth and live well.
Yeah, it's the long-term vision.
It's a long-term profit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a verse in the Quran as well, I think in Surah Rum, it talks about corruption is spread on the earth because of what men have done, at the hands of what men have done. And the early commentaries on that verse by the scholars, this is like way pre-industrialization, like a few generations after the Prophet. The scholars would say that was environmental damage. People have caused corruption that's prevented crops from growing, that's affected their livelihood. And fundamentally, that's what destruction the Quran refers to. It's all about environmental damage, because we get our livelihoods from the environment. We're only rich because of the environment. It provides resources for us. And if we destroy this environment, we destroy ourselves. We destroy our own ability to live well and prosper.
Yeah. I mean, essentially, these ideas are simple and obvious. And I do like to keep things as simple as possible when people visit. We don't need to sort of over intellectualize the debate. It's often very simple things that, as I say, we had a group of 7-year-olds today, and they get it. And you present things to people on the level that they can understand. So that's really important. But the essential basic arguments are quite straightforward. Yeah, if you want to maintain and keep your resources for the long term, you have to put in, you have to pay, you have to invest in those resources.
You guys have been farming for 20
across
years.
The farm, for example. Yeah, well, I was going to add that, when we came here, it was very much an overused piece of land that had just been cropped in the traditional way, and the soil profile wasn't great. There wasn't much diversity on the land. Hedgerows had been taken out. So we've spent 20 years putting all that back in. We've put in an old medieval hedgerow that used to be there. We call it the interfaith hedgerow because it was a wonderful experience. We had Muslim, Jew, and Christian planting trees together. We actually even had 2 Israelis who'd come over from Israel and were visiting the synagogue in Oxford, and they came. And they actually taught us a prayer in Arabic that had been taught to them by Palestinian farmers who they'd helped them replanting olive groves destroyed by the IDF. And they taught us this prayer in Arabic, and we then used that for every tree we planted on our hedgerow. We've put in about 5,000 trees across the farm, which has created 2 different woodland areas. It's increased the diversity. Obviously, no chemical use on the ground, improving the soil structure. That reinvestment in the land, we see it as part of the cost of production. So we are sustainable, but we've done it in a way that is going to leave the land in a better condition than when we inherited it, and we'll pass it on to the next generation. I hope that they will do the same.
Yeah.
Another point, actually, though, is that we employ. We're a 40-acre farm, 50 acres, and we employ about 10 people. That's mostly family, but we have about 4 other employees with us. So we're employing a real community connected to the land, earning their income from farming on the land, using all the resources here. We don't bring in a lot of machinery or other equipment. So it's a very sustainable social environment as well. And this is why I say the two have to be put together, social and environmental issues. If you look at our neighbour across the road, he farms about 1,000 acres and he employs 1 employee. They have masses of machinery that can cost more than your average 3-bedroom house. He uses chemicals and pesticides all the time to maintain the land and allow them to get their crop. So you never see a farmer on the land. 3 or 4 times a year they come in to spray again, to harvest. And they've destroyed the society. The local villages have no connection to farming anymore. They're all middle-class families moving out of Oxford, buying houses that are within the commuter belt. But the farming community has been destroyed. On 40 acres, we have 10 people. And on 1,000 acres, he has himself and another. If we recreated our model on every 45 acres, times that by 10, then 4,000 acres would have whatever, I won't do the maths, but you'd have a really vibrant social community living and farming on the land. And that's what's been lost increasingly in the UK. We just don't have that farming community anymore.
Supporting and bartering.
From your 40 acres, how much food can you produce? How many people can you feed from that 40 acres a year, let's say?
It's good to say. I mean, we have approximately 150 customers a week.
We could produce more than we are, but we
so yeah, I mean,
don't have the labor.
It's probably not a very easy question to answer properly, but yeah. I mean, we have about 100 customers probably a week who are taking their produce from us. We have others that come in through the cafe. We produce all our own veg and things for the cafe when we can. It's difficult to give an actual number, but yeah, I mean, there's 10 livelihoods of people being employed. Obviously, their money is spent in the local economy. And then there's the families that are buying from us on a regular basis. People often make an argument, we couldn't produce enough food this way. Well, our neighbour, again, has 1,000 acres. He's producing nothing of any real use because he produces rapeseed for oil. He'll produce a wheat crop that will probably go for animal fodder. If I had his 1,000 acres, if only, we could invite 50 other families to come and take over portions of that land. You would then have, a massive community of people living and working that land. And then if you were really producing something useful rather than just big empty fields of yellow rapeseed, which doesn't really have a great use, and it doesn't really bring in any value in terms of the environment, you could support more and more people. So it's a very difficult question to answer. There's the academic answer, which actually I would argue shows the opposite of a sort of common wisdom that, we need to be importing all this food. We need to be producing in factory farms. It's not really true. We need to tackle that argument on one level from consumption. We're eating the wrong sort of food. People are eating too much meat, for example, and then tackle it on the other side of actually how you structure rural economies and productivity. It's actually a fact, and it's counter to what most people think, that the productivity of small plots of land is higher than mechanized farming. mechanized farming doesn't actually achieve high yields per acre. It just achieves high, cheap yields overall. And that's through using mechanization, etc., and pesticides. And then there's the environmental cost of that that's not counted. So you have a massive cost that is being paid by society, either through the environmental pollution or actually through the health implications of the type of food that we're eating. So it's a complex question, which probably be another podcast on its own.
Yes, in some way that answered my next question. I was going to ask, let's say the population of the UK is 60 million. If every farmer out there applied the principles that you guys are using, do you think the UK could be fed? That was going to be my next question.
Have to do some maths for that.
Because it's a very interesting.
I would argue. I would argue yes. It would need some fundamental changes. Seasonality would be really important in what you eat, and we're seeing this now with tomatoes not turning up in the supermarkets. We would have to consider seasonality. We live quite happily on pumpkins and potatoes and parsnips and turnips through the winter. We're getting our early spinach coming through now. Seasonality would be very important. But actually, I do believe that a lot of the land that's being farmed in the UK is actually used either for animal fodder or for industrial crops. If you could take that out of production, reduce our meat consumption, focus more on healthy meat, but in much smaller quantities, produce a lot more veg. Of course, you know, anyone who's growing in their own back garden knows that just a 2 meter by 5 meter plot can produce a lot of veg. So if you turned all of this land that we see around us, all of these big fields that have been made bigger and bigger by destroying hedgerows, we turned them back into much more labor intensive fields. But then, of course, that brings the next issue of the amount of labor involved in farming and the issue of mechanization. So it's a sort of can of worms. There are a lot of issues here, but if you want a simple answer, yes.
Last summer, my wife and I, we were staying up with my in-laws, and they have I think a 5 meter by 2 meter or 5 meter by 1 meter vegetable greenhouse. And it was amazing. We got tomatoes every day. We got chilies every day, lettuce almost every day, cucumbers almost every day. And we're getting, in Urdu, we call it kaddu. I'm not sure what the name is now. I think it's bottle gourd.
Pumpkins, courgettes.
Bottle gourd. We were getting that in the summer months as well. That was incredible. Like without much land, it was feeding us consistently almost every day. We find that quite incredible. So there's definitely, with enough effort, and the government supports the infrastructure, and it supports things like maybe having community school farms, and then kids can just grow their own vegetables, have that for lunch, and there's a lot of opportunity there and to address this consumption issues. Yeah, I was gonna ask actually, you guys been farming for 20 years now. How has climate change affected the farm and your livelihoods?
I think there has been climate change. There has been sort of weather change, hasn't there? Because last year we had a bit of a drought. It's happened a few times, and it has affected the crops. We've been okay for water because we have our own well, so we've not had any problems for watering, for feeding the animals and ourselves. But we have reduced the watering of the vegetables.
That had an implication.
And that changed some of the crops. Yeah, I mean, we still have food that we grew, but it just changed sometimes, obviously.
Well, with potatoes, for example, potatoes were a lot smaller this year. We harvested. There was a drought towards the end. They didn't grow as well, and so that was one impact.
But on the whole, we haven't. Too much.
I would say there does seem to be a trend of lower rainfall, but I'm not sure. Climate change is a very complicated issue.
Over 20 years.
Term, isn't it, to assess?
I remember I had a colleague who was a climatologist, and he would always comment that it's very difficult to make these simplistic statements because the patterns of change will actually cause reactions and then reactions to the reactions. You will get colder winters, possibly. You will get drier summers. You may get more extreme events. I think that's probably what everyone tends to agree on, is that there's increase in the extreme events. But yes, anecdotally, on the farm, we've probably seen more dry years, and we have, as a result, taken steps to increase rainwater harvesting on the farm. And that's something we're currently working on even again this year. We want to make sure that we have sufficient rainwater harvested through the winter to ensure that we have surplus water available in the summer. And we're putting in place a lot of water collection from all of the buildings. But we're also putting in a really interesting thing, if anyone wants to come down to the farm and see, a traditional ram pump, which is a type of pump that we're fitting onto our water on the brook. We've got a little brook, which we named Willowbrook. And the ram pump works on water pressure, that you take the water from higher up, and it pushes, a bit like the valves on the heart, it pushes the water up at a certain height and then closes the valve.
The veins.
Like in the heart.
Veins.
It's the, whatchamacallit? Yeah, anyway. So it lifts water through water pressure. And through doing that a number of times, you can actually lift the water about 20 meters. So we're going to have a small reservoir of water from our brook, which will allow us to distribute it around the farm. And we're installing this ram pump, which is ancient technology. It's an old system, doesn't use any electricity, no power. It's just purely by the mechanics of the water pressure, alternating the pressure in a small valve. So yeah, we've tried to take steps to plan ahead. If there is a plus side, the plus side is that we're also trying some exotic crops in the polytunnel, which we've had some success with. How it will really pan out for humanity, God only knows. But I think it's presenting challenges, and we need to react and think about it. And the danger, the worry, the big worry about climate change is not that we're going to have nice sunny beaches in the UK and we can grow olives, is that it will happen too fast, and too fast for the reaction to it. And that could have massive impacts on populations of insects, of animals. So that's the real worry.
And how important is the biodiversity around the farm to actually farming itself?
For the farming, I mean, obviously certain things we've been introducing. We have a lot of beehives on the farm, and we need them for the pollination of the orchards that we planted. Populations of insects are really important to us, maintaining the sort of diversity of the soil structure, and worms and various sort of invertebrates. So that's been really important. We've grown a lot of woodland on the farm, and we use that for things like tree hay, collecting that for winter fodder for the animals. And that all requires a healthy ecosystem. But otherwise, it's really sort of leaving nature for nature. And we've seen a lot of birds. We have some rare species of bird on the farm. The green woodpecker is one. And we have various other ones, which, it's a joy to see them still on the farm, and the created habitats that they can survive in, with woodpeckers down in the woodland. And we have some otters down at our river, which is great. So, yeah, we like to think that the diversity on the farm has increased quite dramatically, really, since we've been here. And that's a result of really leaving the corridors around the farm, in between the fields, to permit that to sort of live side by side with us.
Great. And do you think sustainable farming provides increased resilience towards more volatile weather that might come with climate change?
Absolutely. It gives you the diversity of habitat. It has better water retention. It has shade cover. It provides everything you need to try and survive. The worst thing, if any student of agriculture will know, if you look at things like the 1930s Dust Bowl in America, where they ploughed a lot of lands, they cleared the land, and this has happened in East Africa, in parts of Asia, and it's happening in the rainforest. As soon as you clear the sort of cover that would traditionally be there, temperatures rise anyway by a few degrees as a result of that. They're exposed to wind erosion, they're exposed to all the sort of issues of the desiccation of the climate and the removal of the topsoil, and then that just has a sort of ongoing spiral of environmental damage. So absolutely, having a diverse ecosystem is crucial, and we like to think that's what we have on the farm. My son and his wife have got into foraging recently, and they do a lot of foraging around the farm. And that's a sign of the diversity that they're able to find various mushrooms and plants which are thriving, benefiting.
All right. And what advice would you have to us urban folk who might have a small garden or maybe a balcony which we can grow plants? What can we do to get started and slowly move towards having more resilient and be more connected to nature?
Well, that in itself is great, because that is getting yourself and your family together and tackling the social side of it, you know, getting together and talking and experiencing, planting seeds. I think even in and of itself is enough. And there is, of course, that hadith, which we all know, that the Prophet, peace be upon him, said that if you find yourself on the last day with a seed in your hand, you should plant it, which I think is really addressing that psychological need within us to do something positive and not focus on whether it will change the world. We're not here to save the world, but we're planting that seed to save ourselves, to save our community, our family.
And I think climate change, if it happens, we have to understand Allah has allowed it to happen. So it's not about good or bad. Whatever happens, good or bad, happens because Allah has permitted it. And the real issue or the real point is, what are we learning from it? How is that changing your nafs and allowing you to be pointing with your fitrah to be closer to Allah? So it's not about what's happening out there. Ultimately, it's what's happening inside. How are you changing? So your connection to Allah is strong, and your understanding that however many years you're alive, dunya, it is just waking up from a dream in the end, and you wake up to the reality. So it's just, what are you doing with your time, instead of sort of getting people frightened and making a big drama about climate change and getting over the top. You still have to keep the balance in your life. And if you have a balcony, it's not like, oh, I only have a balcony and they've got a farm. It's like, I have a balcony, alhamdulillah. What can I do on that balcony? How creative can I be in making this balcony beautiful and maybe fill it with food? You know, for maybe only for a few weeks of the summer, but hey, alhamdulillah, a few weeks of the summer, you've grown the food with your own hands and you've shared it with your family and given it to your friends. How beautiful is that? And how has that changed you? And that's the real lesson, rather than, you know, scaremongering about climate change. I'm not about denying climate change or whatever. God knows what climate change it is. Whether it exists or doesn't, it's an opportunity for us to learn and to get closer to our Creator.
That's a good message. I think, you know, as you mentioned, whatever happens, history is in the best of hands. And, you know, Muslims are particularly resilient should be resilient to climate anxiety because of our faith, you know, having that trust in God that whatever happens, it's His will anyway. And we're not going to be judged about we save the earth. It's about, will we good people on the earth? You know, did we make, what efforts did we make towards making the earth better?
Yeah. And associating with people who are doing that. One other aspect of the fun, if I can mention it, is that it's helped us build those bridges with other communities. And I've often said that, you know, you can divide the cake whichever way you want, Muslim, non-Muslim, but I don't like to do that. I like to say those who are doing the right thing and those who are not doing the right thing, you know, those who are trying to move in a positive direction. And we've been brought together with other religious communities, with environmental groups, with people in the local community who are producing in a similar way to us, and we're all on the right side of the argument, I believe. And, you know, we're working together to try and to do something positive. And I think it's really important to be humble, to recognize that being a Muslim is not the little badge that says we've won or we're doing the right thing. It's what you're doing with that. And there are many Muslims, sadly, many Muslim countries who are polluting and destroying and doing things really shouldn't be doing. And there are many Muslims who are doing the right thing, and many that we're associating with from other communities who are doing the right thing. So I think it's really important to build those bridges in communities and within our society.
Wonderful. I think our time is up. It's been wonderful talking to you both, Ruby and Lutfi. It's been, I'm honored to have you spend your time with you as well. Where can my listeners find you? You have a website, Willowbrook Farm, and you're on social media as well. Is it Twitter, Instagram? Are you on TikTok?
We do. Yes, we do. The website's a nice and straightforward one that Lutfi and I understand, but the younger people they do Facebook and
Instagram,
isn't it?
Twitter.
Do they do Twitter?
We also have a YouTube channel because we do a summer music festival as well, where arts and crafts and music festival, where we try and encourage creativity in a much broader sense, connecting to the land,
having some fun,
and just enjoying, being out and bringing people out onto the farm. So we've got various social media platforms, and we're happy anyone that does want to get involved and come and see us. Also, people with ideas of things they want to do. We feel this is a space where we're happy to share and encourage people to contact us.
Great. And your farm is in Oxford, so a good location, not too far from many people. London, Birmingham, Wales.
Yeah,
all quite accessible from there.
Good central location.
Yeah. We did think of initially buying up in Scotland or Wales, and so we were looking around for land all around the UK, in fact, and Allah guided us by presenting this plot.
Which is a 10-minute drive from where we live.
It was. The difference being, it was a lovely plot, and we do feel blessed. And as you say, it's close to Oxford and Birmingham. We only had enough resources. We sold a very modest ex-council house, so we had a small pot of money. In somewhere like, the wilds of Scotland, it might have bought a house with it. Here, it literally just bought the land. So we did live in caravans for the first few years, and it took a while to build ourselves up to the point we are now, where we're actually living in a decent house. But yeah, we're very convenient, and it's very close to Oxford.
Yeah. Thank you again for coming on, and very happy that your farm is successful now, and lots of good things are coming from it, not just food. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Inshallah, you'll come down and visit.